Of course, I mean, when we are planning with migration, there are variety of workloads are there, right? So when we talk about workloads, so workloads can be like anything. It can be your standard particular web application servers. You may have scenario in terms of VMware, SAP, SQL Server, right? So variety of particular workloads are there, and every workload comes up with their own speciality in terms of moving particular those infrastructure from on-premise to cloud or even cloud to cloud. So here, what we're going to talk about in terms of generic approach towards the data point of view, because normally when we are planning with any solutions, right? So it will be more addressed towards what sort of data we do have. Is it NoSQL? So generally we do have three different type of data available in place. One is your structured, semi-structured, and unstructured, right? So these three different type of data formats we do have, and the three different type of data formats we store in terms of variety of you can say database services, what we are getting it into like any services point of view. So it can be Azure SQL, SQL Server. It can be MySQL, PostgreSQL, MongoDB, Cassandra, Gremlin. There are plenty of database options are available in industry, and the expectation is that we have to keep some particular migration planning when the application is getting migrated. So definitely the data also goes along with it, and under that, like, there are a couple of options maybe we can think through. So one of the option is basically big bang migration, where you know that there is a particular migration going to happen from on-premise to cloud probably, and before moving into applications migrated into respective cloud or respective environment, probably we can go ahead with some one-time migration approach where we can have a one-time data migration to be taken care, and there are different mechanisms supported from the migration perspective. Like you can say options are available in terms of data box. You can have like if you are doing it in AWS and all, there is a Snowball. If it's in Azure, then we have Azure Data Box and all that, right? So they are like a kind of use case maybe we can think through. The other side of migration is basically the progressive migration, where you can say that like regular data you keep replicating from on-premise to cloud, and then you can decide in a day that, hey, this is where we're gonna stop replicating from on-prem to cloud, and we will cut over applications, or maybe you can say we can have a redirection of our application links and everything in cloud, and whatever the delta difference is there in terms of database, we will first only take those delta difference and then keep it into cloud, right? So it completely depends on the business side of it, that what kind of application stack you have, what kind of database planning you have, and then accordingly we can manage our overall database operations the way it is expected. So here, this is like another case study what I have added over here. So it's more about you can say yeah. So here we will be talking about this case study, and this case study basically added in terms of understanding that what are the different flavor of database services generally available. Majority of the enterprises having their SQL servers or SQL database on premise. Nowadays, like a lot of modern applications are having combination of data available, right? Where you can consider that SQL, NoSQL, or structured, semi-structured, or unstructured kind of data structures and all that. So here, this is basically a kind of scenario which talks about WWI. It's Worldwide Importers. It's a kind of gaming company. They are popular in terms of Tailspin Toys brand of online video games. They are like basically, I mean, this is like scenario created. And of course, I mean, it is inherited from one of the solution or one of the problem statement provided to the customers. So founded in 2010, the company has basically experienced exponential growth since releasing the first installment of their most popular game franchise to include online multiplayer gameplay. They have since built upon their success by adding online capabilities to the majority of their game portfolio. They decided to take a conservative approach while introducing online gameplay, hosting the gaming services on premises using rented hardware. This approach allowed them to enter the online gaming market with minimal upfront investment and lower risk. For each game, their gaming service setup consists of three virtual machines running the gaming software and five game database hosted on a single SQL Server 2008 R2 Enterprise instance. They are using the service broker feature of SQL Server for sending messages between gaming database. In addition to the dedicated gaming VMs and databases, their game services included authentication and gateway VMs and database shared across all their games. So basically, the company is having similar kind of landscape. If you see, they were releasing multi different particular game platforms, or maybe different particular games what they have, and n number of games. They have one of the front end where they can provide a kind of authentication authorization for the players who can authenticate themselves and basically go through with that particular activity as a part of it. That is one way. Second is like every game has their own particular analytics or data to be generated, right? So whatever the data is getting generated, so those data gets dumped somewhere in particular centralized storage. It can be like, you can say, a data warehouse mechanism where data gets dumped, and from that data warehouse, the standard SQL Server integration service, SSIS, or SSRS reporting and all that. So those services basically utilize in terms of generating reports and working with those particular data analytics. And then those data will be served to the customers or probably the users or developers, whomsoever, like they wanted to provide those information. So this is more about like having your particular data, having the applications up and running, the gaming platform to be up and running. Now, this is basically, I mean, as you all know, like I mentioned earlier also multiple times, that in terms of SQL Server 2000, or even in general, not just only SQL Server, but just the Windows 2008 server. So Microsoft has basically stopped supporting the SQL Server 2008 OS. So any organization who basically runs their particular services on top of that platform, they have to migrate from 2008 to 2012 or 2016 or something, right? So that is what basically their decision, that okay, I mean, whatever the current platform they are like up and running, they just wanted to migrate it from on-premise to cloud, and probably modernizing or probably migrating their particular data platform services for each gaming platform, and then it has to be migrated from on-premise to cloud. Now here, basically, looking at the current situation, so Tailspin Toys are basically subsidiary of this WWI. I mean, just a summary of it. It's an online gaming company experiencing like exponential growth, struggling to manage expanding database infrastructure, lack of ability to easily scale, looking to migrate gaming services to the cloud. Now, these are some of the core components what they had in terms of on-premise, like gaming servers. They do have SQL Server 2008 database servers, data warehouse, and as well as like reporting components, what they were planning to migrate. So in this particular scenario, the customer needs basically, so they were planning to migrate all gaming services into cloud, move data warehouse and associated services to cloud, want to minimize migration cost, looking to improve database security, want to improve game experience, and disaster recovery from regional outage as well. Customer objection, so looking for comparison of SQL database hosting options in Azure. So of course, I mean, with the growth of cloud service provider, you will come across variety of data service providers who basically offer their particular services across the cloud service provider. It can be Azure, AWS, and Google, or even on-premise as well. So a lot of enterprises basically think about in terms of in that direction, that okay, which one is the beneficial to them, what kind of objective they do have, what kind of SLA they are planning, the high availabilities, and many different particular features they were expecting to support their application database and all, right? So that is basically a kind of standard requirement they do have. What tools can help in terms of evaluating database against target platform and identify potential issues? Can we have network isolations and secure channel access from on-premise? Now, this is like many enterprise expects when they have certain type of line of business applications that, okay, we do have on-premise setup and we are expecting that probably database may remain on-prem, but we just wanted like application to be up and running somewhere in cloud. And at the same time, we are expanding our network connectivity, like we discussed earlier, right? Site to site, express route, and all that. So via that, they wanted to connect and access their particular database engines on top of it. Want to avoid cloud vendor lock-in, and at the same time seeking guidance around adopting best practices in the cloud. So these are some of the standard customer objectives they do have. Now, customer goals basically. So this case studies basically help you out in two different ways. First, of course, you can plan for your solution architect related preparations. That is one way, because most of the RFPs or probably the request for proposals or request for informations or whatever we call it out, basically float into similar kind of area. Of course, I mean, I have not added a lot of business details under these, because normally when we have RFPs and all, it's basically not just only technical requirement, but it also includes your functional requirement, your business requirement, and many other particular aspects will be included in that case. So here, since we are learning about Azure, so I'm focusing on the technical side of it, that understanding cloud service capabilities, and probably we can align those capabilities based on the business requirement, and then probably we can come up with the recommendation of services and all. So here you can consider that that is one way. Second option is basically for the certification perspective. So Microsoft started adding these kind of case studies in their certifications as well. So for example, you are planning for any certification track, AZ104, 204, or even be it like 305, because that is something purely focused on solution architect AZ305. So during these certification tracks also, they do have similar kind of case studies provided as in question answers, right? So they will give you the scenario, they will give you a kind of explanations, what is expectation from the customer's point of view, what are the technology stacks they were expecting. They were providing you a kind of problem statement that, hey, this is something there. What are the potential services you can recommend to the customers, and which feature of that particular service basically help customers to solve the issues, right? So in that case, the case study basically, if you have like worked on a couple of case studies, then that will really give you kind of confidence to understand the service capabilities against the requirement of the customers, what they have given. And probably you will be able to align that when to recommend which kind of services, so that it will help you out to basically understand the scenarios and other particular stuff, right? So these are the two objectives basically, like case study solves, right? So as I said, like one of them is like the real-time discussions from the you can say RFP or pre-sales or solution architect related kind of activities, whereas second is more on the certification side of it. So here, these are the three major goals from the customer's point of view. One of them is basically they were expecting migration. So migrating majority of their workloads to Azure, which includes their reporting, their gaming servers, their database, and as well as particular data warehouse and all that, right? The database specifically migration point of view. Now, I mean, this is our primary objective of this case study is for the database. So we wanted to identify, or maybe you can say validate that when the database getting migrated, so what kind of options you may have, what kind of like scenario maybe you can take care of it, and then accordingly you will be able to go for the database migration as a part of it, right? So that is something maybe we can talk about. The third component is scale to usage. So applications should perform well at peak usage while not being over provisioned. Now, normally these kind of like standard requirement, most of the customers comes up with it. So we need to plan and design with best possible services offering, and then probably we can optimize that particular services over the time, looking at the usage and all that stuff, right? So this is basically a kind of standard requirement what customer has it, and we need to come up with the recommendation approach that what are the standard service they can go through with it, what kind of approach maybe they can follow, and they can have a kind of migration also to be taken care into the consideration, right? So here I am basically adding this. Normally, if it's a generally I do this way, like if I have a particular chance to conduct certain type of classroom sessions and all that, so usually I give them a time to think about this particular case study. I divide the team, and those team basically discuss amongst each other. They discuss about the problem statement, whatever they have learned so far, so understanding those service capabilities and features and all that, and they come back with their particular diagrammatic approach or their particular solution, right? The way I ask you guys about that high availability design towards the platform services, right? Similar to that, I do with this kind of case studies as well. So in that scenario, what will happen? Of course, I mean, you get a chance to understand others' thought process as well, and you will get to know that what is the expectation from the problem statement, and then what proposal you may come up with the solutions and all, right? This is something I will take you through with it. So it will give you some idea that generally whenever any problem statement, of course, I mean, there are many folks you must have done this particular activity in your past, but people who all are like new to this area or you are exploring this particular part, so this is something new for you, where you need to understand that when we are planning to analyze any particular business problem, especially the technical side of it, so what should be the approach? Of course there are many things involved in that case, but I'm trying to highlight like what is the expectation versus how we can analyze, and then probably we can go through with some solution providing, right? So here basically the expectation from this particular case study is that currently I'm focusing on the database side of it, right? Of course, I mean, there are many other components are part of it, like considering network communications, having your reporting to be migrated, having your game platform to be migrated and all that, but majority of the expectation towards the database side of it. So here in this particular case study, first we need to understand that the overall components, whatever they have, versus what should be the recommendation probably you can think of at high level. Normally, what is happening when we go through with any solution designs and all, at least we understand the objective of the migration. And based on that, at least we can try to analyze high level that what all the services fit into that particular criteria, and then later on we can deep dive into the problem statement, and then we analyze that okay, which particular service, which particular environment best suitable, and then probably we can recommend in that scenario, right? So here looking at this particular problem statement at high level, the customer's expectation is more about having the data platform to be migrated, because gaming data for them is one of the critical for their particular business, right? I mean, of course, I mean, the user interface and everything is equivalent, but the gaming data is one of their core business objective. So in that case, like there are a couple of services I can consider in terms of recommendation, and that is starting with Azure Data Warehouse, which is now renamed as in Azure Synapse Analytics, which is more about allowing you a kind of centralized data warehouse in cloud. Data migration assistance, this is something called out as in DMA as well, data migration assistance. So this is like a kind of built-in tool provided by Microsoft. Now these tools basically over the time Microsoft has revised a lot. Okay, I mean they came up with the over the time, I can say since 2014-15 onwards, year 2014-15 onwards, there were like multiple tools identified by Microsoft in terms of migration perspective, whether it's a partner tool, whether it's their Microsoft release tools and all that. So these tools basically help you out in terms of performing analysis across your migration objective, what you have, right? So it will analyze, it will check the dependencies, it will give you a kind of report that whether this database is compatible to the for the migration approach or not. If yes, then what all the probably remediation you need to do before migration. If it is possible that as is, then what can be done? If not, then what is the alternative available and all, right? So basically the purpose of this particular tool is to give you a kind of analysis report and also support you a kind of migration activity while you're planning to move your particular data from on-premise to cloud. That is one way. So the second tool probably I can think of is data migration assistance. We also have Azure VM or VMSS. So VM or VMSS is more about like either virtual machine where you can say, as per the requirement from the customer side, they were expecting gaming front end, the application side of it, to be hosted somewhere on the VM. And also there was one particular objective that they were looking for some particular scalability towards their applications as well. So here we need to think about, it can be your individual instance or it can be your virtual machine scale set where horizontal scaling will be addressed, and then you can have auto scaling rule to be applied. So depending on the traffic or the pattern what is expected towards the game, they can take care of those scalability, and they can avoid any over provisioning or under provisioning scenario in that scenario, right? So it's more about like Azure virtual machines or virtual machine scale set, like depending on the objective they can decide. The Azure SQL MI. Now, MI stands for Manage Instance. So Microsoft is offering couple of SQL database flavors in their catalog. So it's basically Azure SQL database, which is also fall into the category of single database. You also have a scenario in terms of Azure SQL Elastic Pool. And the third one is more about this one, the Azure SQL Manage Instance. And there is a fourth one also that is something called out as an Azure SQL database with serverless mechanism, which is like you can provision that database for time being and then get rid of that database once the activity is done, right? So it's like more about like a different flavor of database services what they are offering. Along with that, looking at the objective, customer also had a reporting requirement as well. So nowadays, most of the SSRS like SQL Server reports, reporting services, and all that, they are majorly getting migrated to Power BI reports, right? So those reports basically created and migrated into that. So you will get particular centralized reporting mechanism, and then you can have modern reports also to be available as a part of it. And last but not least, in terms of Azure Migrate, so here we are considering like different component also to be migrated. So for example, you may have that application servers or some of the other instance based like front end and all that, right? So those kind of authentication authorization servers and all that. So those things basically, if I'm considering, then probably I can think of Azure Migrate as well. So here Azure provides you all possible features in terms of performing your migration, and then you can have these particular components or these particular services to be considered for the overall migration approach what we have. So generally, like when we are planning to approach any solutioning and all that, right? So first of all, we should understand that what is there from the customer side of it versus what is available from the cloud point of view, and then probably we can try to align or match components like apple to apple, and then we can say, hey, this is how probably we can move forward. Now it may be possible sometimes these particular components may not be uh, probably fulfill the requirement what is expected as a part of the solutioning. So you might have to think about some workarounds, you might have to come up with some particular alternatives as well, and then probably you can provide the recommendations accordingly, right? So here, when we are talking about database point of view, right? Since customer has the kind of expectation that they were having SQL Server 2008 R2 servers, and as we all know that now Microsoft has stopped supporting SQL Server 2000, or not just only SQL Server, they stopped supporting 2008 servers. So whatever the database or whatever the application stack and other stuffs are like up and running needs to be migrated to the 2012 or 2016 or whatever the latest OS, which will be more compatible towards that applications and games and whatever they have. Now here in Azure, we do have a couple of database services provided. So starting with simple SQL Server virtual machine, it's like infrastructure as in services provided by Microsoft. There are many business use cases where I have seen like customers expecting that, hey, we do have on-premise SQL Server, and we wanted to continue as it is in cloud, looking at the database size and all that. Maybe so if you guys remember, I was talking about earlier about that restaurant chain migration. So they were having like database size around 100, 120 or 150 TB terabytes of size. And it was like huge database. And they were, and it's not that one or two servers, but they were like multiple servers they were tracking, or they were having it for their applications and for their data management and all that. Now, during the migration process, so they were expecting that it has to be migrated as is, because moving from virtual machine to platform as a service, it was a kind of bit costly component for them, and they wanted to preserve cloud agnostic approach also for their SQL servers and all. So they expected like we can migrate as is, we can have SQL Server to be up and running as is, and later stage if they feel that okay, we now wanted to get rid of managing infra part and wanted to get into platform as a service, then they will do it later stage. So initial migration was infra to infra only. So SQL Server basically provide you all standard features, what you have it with your on-premise SQL Server. And then, of course, here the migration was more from 2008 to 2012 or 2016 kind of. So definitely, I mean, compatibility and other stuff needs to be checked. And after that, they can plan for the migration activities for that particular infra to infra. Now, when it comes to platform as a service, right? So Azure is offering you three flavor of platform as a service in terms of Azure SQL database. So that is Azure SQL database with single DB or elastic pool. There is Azure SQL MI, that is managed instance, and Azure SQL serverless database services. So these three flavor of relational database engine provided in terms of platform as a service. Now here the expectation from the customer point of view that they wanted to get rid of their certain database management or probably the server management kind of activity, and also at the same time they wanted to take care of their that 2008 SQL Server database to be supported in target environment as well. Now here, if I'm talking about Azure SQL database or Azure SQL serverless, these are two particular platform as a database service provided by Microsoft, which offers latest and greatest database version to be supported. Whereas the managed instance, basically Microsoft came up with this database engine bit late. Initially, when they started, they were only offering Azure SQL database only, which was like platform as a service and supporting your latest and greatest database platform on top of it. But there are many enterprises started requesting that, hey, we do have these kind of database, and the problem statement is we don't want to manage the underlying infrastructure. We wanted to migrate our particular legacy databases into platform as a service. But looking at the current feature support on Azure SQL database or SQL serverless and all that, it seems that they are not compatible with the older version of the database engines and all, like the features and the functionality which are supported on those database platform, which are not available in these particular latest platform services. So we are expecting that a kind of database engine which takes care of those legacy database features as well. Of course, I mean, if all not, then at certain extent we are expecting those features to be supported. So later stage, Microsoft has launched this Azure SQL Managed Instance, which basically offers like couple of pricing plan like business critical or hyper scale, and like couple of business tier they have launched along with this particular managed instance, and they added the capabilities that the legacy feature or maybe the certain standard which are supported by the older version of the database and all, they started adding under that as a platform as a service. So customer can migrate their old database engine to manage instance, and they can of course get the analysis report that what all the features currently they have on the legacy database, are those features are supported in managed instance or not. So this is something basically done via that database management assessment tools and all that, and that will give you a kind of report that okay, best suitable target platform, it can be like migrated to Azure SQL database, or it can be migrated to manage instance, so that you can take a call and then probably you can go for the migration and all. So normally, in terms of planning and working with the database assessment and all that, basically we can rely on certain tools that will give you some clarity about feature supports and all that. And if we are expecting certain features to be available in target platform, and if it is not, then definitely, I mean, you have a default choice is infrastructure as in service, right? Because unless and until Microsoft do not add those features into those target platform as a service, then definitely there is no scope in terms of migrating those database which expect certain features to be supported and all. So of course, I mean, the feature list Microsoft is keep on adding. So it will be really challenging for you to say that, okay, only these are the features are supported and not the rest of them, because Microsoft is keep on updating those feature list support under those legacy database systems what you have, because they also wanted like more customers can get rid of their infrastructure component and go with the platform offerings and all that. So slowly and gradually they will keep adding those particular features as a part of it. So if I say like today XYZ feature is not supporting, but let's say in next quarter or in next 6 month time frame, Microsoft has updated this particular product features and they have released those new features as a part of it. So definitely, I mean, it's more about like assessment. It's more about like when you are performing the migrations and all that, you may go through with those analysis and the assessment report, and that will give you clarity that okay, in your current database platform, what all the features are there, and if you want to go ahead with targeting into any one of this platform, what features probably you can expect. Especially infrastructure to infrastructure, we don't need to worry about it. Only thing we need to worry about is the framework supports, or maybe you can say service packs and other things which are relative to your database engine to be up and running. Those things probably we need to remediate or fix in a way so that you can migrate from like lower version to upper version of that particular OS and all that stuff. So normally it's more about like planning in terms of what kind of platform we are expecting. Now, if I'm talking about like platform as a service, especially Azure SQL database, okay. So Microsoft is offering you DTU. So DTU stands for Data Throughput Unit, or it's more about like a kind of performance metrics what they have calculated under this particular unit. So normally what is happening when we are planning to migrate from infrastructure to platform, then one of the question comes in mind that what will be the performance metrics, how are we going to measure the performance of my database and all, and what will be the pricing tier basically applicable towards that, right? So I can get better performance what I was achieving on my infra, same thing I wanted to expect on my particular platform as a service as well. So DTU is like it's not known term in our day-to-day work, because that is something innovated by Microsoft only. They came up with this DTU concepts where they are combining three element under this. Normally every database basically you can say visualize their performance with three things, right? They always consider the storage, they always consider the CPU and RAM, and based on that probably you can have kind of performance to be calculated or number of IOPS to be calculated for that database servers and all that, right? Now when it comes to platform as a service, we don't have access to the underlying infrastructure. That is something managed by the service provider in terms of Microsoft. And when they are offering you this particular feature, so these things they have calculated or added as a part of this particular DTU. Now, question will come that, okay, then if I migrate, then is there any option available where I can see that which DTU, which database probably I can go for so that I can achieve that better performance and all that particular stuff, right? So the quick answer is there is a particular tool available, or Microsoft has created a DTU calculator. So here I can say there is a particular separate site Microsoft has provided which basically provide you a kind of DTU calculations. There are some of the utility and some tools are available, some of the PowerShell scripts and all what Microsoft has released. You can run this particular thing on your SQL Server, and it will give you some particular report out that, okay, when you are planning to migrate this, your infrastructure as a service to platform as a service, and you wanted to target which platform, which particular size, which capacities and all that, then it will give you some particular report out that this is something probably you can target and all. So this is like a kind of built-in tool what Microsoft has released in terms of understanding that like what kind of analysis we are expecting towards the database, and then we can download, install, and it will give you some particular recommendations on top of it. Now, this is like a kind of recommendation. Okay. I mean, I always tell everybody that, see, when you go through with migration, assessment, and all that, they always give you recommendation. They will not give you the right size of the target platform, right? It is always be calculated, or it will be always like you get the right size after monitoring or getting the performance idea of those services. So you cannot 100% rely on any of the tool. It will be over the time. It is always like we should remember this formula that migrate, monitor, optimize, right? It is like kind of formula you should remember throughout the cloud journey, because that only give you a kind of constant you can say performance optimizations, lower the cost of your infra and all that stuff you will be able to manage in that particular scenario. So here, when we are planning with this particular Azure SQL database, then you have this DTU. Manage instance basically comes up in the flavor of vCore, that is virtual core. The way we have our virtual machines and all that, they are also based on the virtual cores. Similar to that, the manage instance also follow that particular kind of pricing tier, and then you can select that what database engine or what pricing tier you are planning, so that you can achieve the similar performance which you had on premise, and something that you can get it in terms of managed platform as a service. So this is like a kind of maybe you can say database as in different service offerings Microsoft has it, which we can identify that which one we wanted to go for. Now, in line to that, looking at the problem statement, I have divided this problem statement solution in three parts: the user authentication and gateway, gaming platform, the middle section, and the third part is data analytics and visualization. And the bottom layer basically talks about all supporting services which we can have a part of our offerings, and these services basically help you out in terms of different options like keyword, Microsoft Defender for the security point of view, you can say the Azure Monitor and whatnot, like these kind of services probably we can associate with that, and these services basically help you out in terms of addition to this. Of course, I can add even Azure DevOps, and if I want to make more fancy this architecture, then I can add those particular relative services also as a part of it. But right now I just kept it as minimum as possible, looking at the current requirement what customer has. Starting with this authentication and authorization, so one of the standard expectation from the requirement point of view is that they were expecting kind of authentication and authorization. And under this particular authentication authorization process, they have a front end. Now, probably the recommendation is in a two-way. One is basically virtual machines. If they wanted to keep like instant migration and getting better performance from the current existing environment, in that particular case, the virtual machine, the standalone VM can be increased with capacity, and it can be like supporting all those particular the vertical performance kind of metrics. Whereas the horizontal scaling, if I'm expecting looking at the load, I wanted to add more number of instance looking at the performance and all that, probably virtual machine scale set works better. Now, right now, looking at the current scenario, we are expecting that, okay, the application side, we will keep it as it is with intra to infra only. Whereas SQL Server 2008 servers, probably we can help customers to migrate with manage instance, looking at their analysis and assessment reports and all that. And it will be one of the standard database engine or platform as a service, maybe they can think of. So the advantage is that the underlying management of infrastructure as a service, probably they can get rid of, and they can have a fully managed platform as a service supported in target platform. So here, that is one of the particular user authentication and gateway perspective I can think of. The middle part in terms of gaming platform, right? I'll come in upcoming slides that what should be the approach they can take care for the migrations and all that. The gaming platform perspective, definitely, I mean, I can say n number of game platform they may have, the same replica will be go for it, like three minimum servers with game software and five gaming database with business critical service tier. Now here, every platform as a service basically comes up with their own pricing tier to be as an offering, right? So they come up with like as I said, business critical or kind of standard pricing tier they do have, and accordingly your pricing will be applicable. The replication pricing, high availability, SLA, all those things basically get revolves around this particular pricing tier what we have. So business critical is one of the kind of you can say better performant kind of service tier what they are offering under this managed instance, and that will basically best suitable from the gaming point of view. So that is something maybe we can recommend. And the data what is getting captured, right? So the data basically we need to figure it out that how the data integration can be done from various gaming servers to make it like centralized and then probably push it into your data warehouse, and from there the further analytics and other process probably we can think through. So here definitely, I mean, multiple ways are there. One of them is basically Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse Analytics, maybe we can think through, where you can ingest your data incoming from various different sources, and those data can be stored into the centralized location, and the data can be shared amongst the variety of analytical tool what we have. So Power BI, there are other companies using Talent, or probably I can have my SharePoint where I can create my custom reports and publish those reports, or either you create separate Power BI dashboard and there also you can create and publish your reports and all. And there are organizations who basically decides that I have seen like there are a couple of organizations who don't want to get into license track, and they basically create their own custom applications where maybe the React JS frameworks and all that stuff they use it, and some of the reporting tools available nowadays, or maybe some of the frameworks and libraries available, so they can use those particular libraries and develop their own custom reporting applications as well. So it is completely depend on the company to company, like how they are comfortable with licensing part or versus developing from everything from scratch and all that. So looking at this particular kind of solution, it's more about planning that moving the database platform from 2008 to manage instance, and basically in that case they were expecting kind of assessment and other stuff to be done. Now here, this is like another way, or I mean, tried the same view what was there in requirement. Similarly, I have tried like the, okay, this is how probably they can go for, and this is like other view. So it's just the view architecture view, nothing else. So here we can say preferred solution from the migration perspective, right? So here, manage instance, basically we can provide a kind of recommended approach, because looking at the current version of SQL Server or the virtual machine, that is something supported or up and running on 2008 servers. And based on that, we can probably provide a kind of recommendation that looking at the assessment reports and all that, and it will provide you kind of recommended approach that you can go ahead with manage instance to be supported. And that is something also available in the form of platform as a service. Supported database migration from on-premise with minimal to no database changes. Now, when I say minimal to no database changes, that means whenever sometimes like you have some legacy environment or older version of platforms and all that, so certain times you might have to do some normalizations, you might have to change certain configurations, or some of them you have to update looking at your current database schema and other structures what we have. Or the feature wise also maybe you need to look at it. So in that case, with minimal to no change, you can have a kind of migration. If report says that since it's a legacy, but still Windows 2008 server based database supported as it is in managed instance, then there is no harm in terms of moving it as it is. That is something where probably we can get some result. Provide all of the past benefits, right? What Azure SQL database is offering you, like SLA availability and all that stuff, which we are expecting in terms of platform as a service, the management and all that, right? Which includes native virtual network and near 100% compatibility with on-premise SQL Server as well. Now, when I say near 100%, that means it is always that you have to analyze first, because without analysis, you cannot say that since it's Microsoft announced that it supports all the legacy database, so we are good to go ahead as it is, right? So it is always recommended approach that first you run the analysis, get the assessment report, and then if all good, you will get the prompt message directly into those assessment tool itself, where it will give you the idea that okay, what is your current version of database, what are the features expected, and if you migrate it to manage instance, then whether it is compatible or not, or it can be like you can migrate it to Azure SQL database as in another platform as a service or not. So it will give you those assessment reports, and then you can get started with the migration towards those platform what we are like looking at it. So ultimately, when we are planning with this particular approach, what sort of migration activity we should plan, right? So database point of view, this is like a kind of approach we should take it. If you see the last box, the pink one, which I said, post migration is always after migration, probably it will be a kind of your replicated applications and database and all that. So it should be always migrate, monitor, optimize, migrate, monitor, optimize, migrate, monitor, optimize. So before that, generally we can get started first of all with the assessment or discovery phase. You can identify the requirement of the database into the target platform or into the target environment, what all the current features are supported into that particular database, and what is expected feature to be in migrated platform, right? So it will give you that report, and based on that, probably you can prepare for your data replications and all. Now, as I said, like there are two ways to go for it. One is Big Bang, where you migrate your particular data with the help of data box and all. So if you see over here in Azure portal, we have this particular database only migration options available, right? So here we can consider that either I can go ahead with this database migration tool, or that is like progressive database migration, I can say. Whereas the other is like Big Bang migration, where I can write the data on a Microsoft provided data box. I mean, if people are coming from AWS, you must have heard about Snowball and all that, right? So they are basically a kind of disk available. I mean, in layman language, if I want to explain it, just the disk which are encrypted, and these are like standard SSD, right? And these SSD basically allows you to write your particular data on top of it. You can also encrypt them, and these disks you can ship to the Microsoft data center, and these disks basically added into your Azure account, and from there onwards you can access them into your environment. So that way it is considered as in kind of Big Bang migration, that you one time write those particular data, send it to the Microsoft at one go, and then they will push those particular data into your respective account with the whatever the encryptions and other things you have followed. So nobody can read the data from those disks because it's your encrypted disk. So that way at least you can trust and ship those data to the Microsoft, and then those data box basically added into your own account, and they will allow you to migrate your data with Big Bang. Whereas the progressive, generally I call it out as in progressive migration, because it's more about over the time you keep moving your data from on-premise to cloud, right? So you can imagine that initially you have like, let's say 10 GB of data from on-premise, right? And you are thinking that, okay, we have a timeline given for overall migration, like 15 days, 20 days, or something like that, for example. And during that time frame, you have still time to go for the cutover or final closure date, that from this date onwards my application will be available in cloud. And between that time frame, like your application or your database basically start moving or replicating data from on-premise to cloud. And once the data has been replicated, it may be possible initially the application is getting access from on-premise only. So still every day new data is getting dumped into that database, correct? So during that process, we are expecting that, okay, whatever the new data is incoming, that is something we can consider as in delta difference, that whatever the delta difference is there, that will keep syncing or replicating from on-premise to cloud. And one day we will decide that, okay, yeah, I mean, this is the date we will close the endpoint from on-premise and move it into cloud. And from that date onwards, all data will be written into the cloud-based database and all. Now, when you have that particular planning and everything in place, you can decide during that particular time frame as well that Now, whatever the last and latest data has been written into my database, we will go like check and identify that has data has been migrated or not, right? Can give a report to customer that, hey, this is like apple to apple, or maybe whatever the data has been available on prem, this is what the final query, and this is what we got even in migrated database as well. So this is the comparison report, and now we are ready to cut over, stop writing data anything on premise, and then we can have all redirection to the cloud based database engines as well, right? So that way also probably we can plan with progressive migrations on top of it. So normally when we are going through with these particular kind of data platform related activities and all, so in those particular objective, probably we can plan that how and what particular data size we do have, what kind of migration approach we are expecting, what is the business criticality or application requirement you have, and then accordingly you can plan for that migrations and all that activity. Now it is always advisable that you should check what is the data size and all that, right? So I'll share one of the use case with this restaurant chain scenario itself. Like they were having around 3K servers, right, across the 6 different data center, and majority of them were like database engine or database SQL servers or oracles and all that thing they were having it. Majority of them were SQL server. So when we started migration, some of the data center, they were having like huge setup of databases, and initially the customer side architect said that, hey, we migrated certain databases via our express route or site to site VPN and all that on premise to cloud. So we wanted to go through with the same process. So you guys should go ahead with that configurations, plan our Azure migrate project, and start replicating based on the phase wise application and server migration what we have. So one of the recommendation I gave is that, okay, so and so data center, I see like almost they were having around 800 servers on that in that data center, and around almost you can say 40% of 40 to 60% of like servers were like majority of them SQL servers and all. So I told them like this is something I see one of the biggest chunk of database in the so and so data center. So we should go ahead with the approach of Big Bang. So once we have the Big Bang migrated, then there and we will keep that data center to be migrated at last. So meanwhile, we can have all those 40 to 60% servers get migrated at one go, and then later stage we can have a delta sync between the on-premise to cloud, and then we can have a kind of report out that, okay, each server wise we can plan, and we can get the idea that, okay, which server data has been fully migrated, and we can plan for those servers to be cut over. So I mean later stage they everybody agreed to it, and then they decided like, okay, I mean that would be one of the better idea, because the size of the servers and database and everything like calculatively under that data center was huge. And once migrated, then we get a better idea that what is the data difference we need to sync, and then probably we can have faster cutover, and we can reduce the timeline instead of migrating one by one or couple of set of servers and all that. So it's more about like kind of use case where we can plan and understand that the size of the database, the timeline what you get in terms of migration, because that is also plays an important role, that sometimes you get very short deadline, sometimes you get enough timeline. So it is completely depend on the business to business point of view. So here, this is like a kind of standard approach maybe we can think through when it comes to migration perspective. So it can be like progressive or Big Bang. Now here, generally, as I said, like we get these three options to run SQL database in Azure. It can be standard virtual machine, Azure SQL managed instance, or Azure SQL database with the platform as a services. So looking at the current objective, Windows 2008 server, the managed instance basically best suitable in that particular offerings what we have discussed. And I have highlighted couple of comparison also, like out of these three databases. Now these comparison numbers, what you see, like, okay, here the size and everything I have highlighted. So these size may vary, okay? Because usually what is happening, over the time, the way I have seen, Microsoft has keep on increasing the particular performance and the storage capacity towards their services. So I always recommend everybody that, hey, when you are planning to recommend any services to the customers, basically size, storage capacities, and all that stuff, right? You should always look at first the current product update, if in case any, and if it is there, then first take a look at it, because that may change your migration scenario, that may change your service offerings and all that, because cloud is like a kind of constant update, right? I mean, it's not that once released then you get the lifetime same features and all that, right? So it's a constant update. So the size, quota and limit, storage, performance, the number of IOPS, pricing tier, these things generally may vary time to time basis, and that is something we should keep a track of it. So whenever we are planning to design and offer any particular solution, at least we can evaluate that, and then probably we can provide some recommendations accordingly, right? So whenever we are planning with these particular database engines, right, what is the objective? Whether customer is ready to take care of the management and operations of those SQL Server instances, better to go ahead with infrastructure as a service. But customer says that, hey, the objective is not to take care of the underlying infrastructure. We just wanted database engine to be up and running. There are a lot of features we are expecting as an automated, like say for example, the backup recoveries and all that, right? So for example, I wanted that the data has been replicated to the across the region. So then in that case, I don't have to worry about it. Like we can configure that the GRS or those kind of replication mechanism. Now, when you are configuring this, it will only take that database redundancy. There might be possibility that last minute, last second of data, what has been written into primary region may not get replicated to the other region. So we need to consider those SLA and other conditions as well. So during that particular process, selecting a right database is something, or maybe right service is something we should always analyze their offerings, the API change underlying quota and limits, what they are offering, and the other supportive components, like if in case we are expecting DevOps to be supported, or scaling to be supported, or feature to be supported and all. So it is always recommended that you should keep looking at the cloud offerings and what all the enhancement and updates cloud provider has offered, and accordingly probably we can go through with the recommendations, right? So in that scenario, these are some of the three components maybe we can consider it in place when you are planning to offer them. So it's more about VM, manage instance, and the SQL DB. And then we can have like some of the pricing tier to be vary, and it will give you some better performance and the database storage and other features as a part of it as an offerings, right? Last but not least, in terms of migration point of view, now some of the tools has been changed also in this. Say for example, the first one is there, database experimentation assistant. So now this is something basically they changed the name, and it is like now built in into your management studios and all that itself. The database migration assistance, they have renamed it as in database migration simple. Azure SQL Database Migration Service, which is again part of Azure Migrate itself, and SQL Server Migration Assistant, that is one of the standard like Azure Database Migration. They have just recently renamed, and that service is available under one that, right? So the naming convention, I will say that that is something Microsoft is keep on updating. Simple example is Active Directory, right? Like till last year, I think in this 2024 itself, they have changed from Active Directory to Enter ID. Right? Till that time, it was completely Active Directory. Everybody was known to it. So yeah, I mean, over the time, to keep these particular tool chains alive and all, and they are keep on updating names and all. So yeah, I mean, more or less, we just need to get familiar with the naming convention and all. Now here, this is something more about data point of view. There are other particular uh, database migration feature what Microsoft has given. So if I'm considering this Azure Database Migration Service, so what Microsoft has done, they have given the like options that what type of data you are planning to migrate. Okay, and where is that? Here it is. You can decide that which flavor of data you are expecting to be migrated, right? So for example, if I'm planning migrate to Azure SQL DB, migrate to Azure SQL Manage instance, migrate to SQL Manage instance, right? Migrate to SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, migrate to SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, online, offline, right? So what Microsoft has done, this is purely from SQL Server to SQL Server. Other than that, any flavor of database you are expecting, right? Migrate to Azure DB for PostgreSQL online via with portal. So there are different database migration, different flavor of database migration scenarios are given to you. So we can decide that what is your current platform you have, which you wanted to plan for the migration, and then accordingly, you can take a call using this Azure database migration approach and the different feature what we are expecting as a part of it. So it will give you all possible features, all possible activities where you can decide that how and what probably you wanted to take care and which database migration activities you are planning to consider it. So for example, if I'm targeting this migrating to Azure managed instance, then if I go inside that, so the similar steps like, okay, you can use data migration service, and then there are some of the steps and configurations and prerequisites are given. You can download that, you can install that, and then it will give you all that assessment report, recommendation, remediation activities, that what you need to do, how you can do it, all that stuff. And then accordingly, you can trigger your particular migration activity as a part of it. So there are certain guides are given. Now, these are some of the standard guides I can say. It may be possible sometimes you need to understand that what is your current landscape of infrastructures and all that, and then accordingly you might have to connect with Microsoft as well, because sometimes what is happening, like when we go through with migration, there are some of the dependencies required. So those dependencies to fix your network, fix your update, your particular framework, patch, update, and all that stuff. And post that, your migration may get started. So in certain scenario, we might have to reach out to Microsoft support team as well, and you might have to have some particular insight from there, from them to begin with these migrations and all. So when I was talking about this restaurant chain migration, so they were having also similar kind of attributes, a couple of area when we were having some service pack updates, some of the role based like user roles and all that stuff when we were going through with it. So we had to reach out to Microsoft for certain intervene or their particular recommendation towards those updates and all, because sometimes like some of the informations, I mean, I don't see it straightforward available. So definitely, I mean, it's good to connect with product teams and then you can get some insight from them as well. So normally when we are expecting kind of migration journey and all that stuff, this is basically a kind of approach maybe we can think through when it comes to database point of view. So during your overall application, or maybe your, when you say application, database or server migrations and all that, probably we can incorporate this particular database migration related activity also as a part of it, and then you can take a call that how, what, and like kind of migration journey you can begin with, and you can perform the overall migration towards the cloud perspective, right?
Well, that was our expert, and thank you so much for staying with us till the end of the video. Now all you have to do is just click the link in the description below, or if you are just starting out, just type k21academy.com/azure02. Now all you have to do is just enter a name, enter email ID, enter phone number, and click on register now, and you will be redirected to this page. You can also add this to your Google Calendar or Apple Calendar, and I promise this is something that you don't want to miss. So go ahead, click on the link and step into the world where learning knows no boundaries. Till then, keep enjoying. I'll see you in the next video.